Okay, guys, hello and welcome to Cyber Diaries, episode number 15. We have another amazing guest in our studio today, and we have Jacek from Let's Go DevOps. So, Jacek, first of all, welcome to the episode.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Brilliant. So, I guess, first of all, let's go DevOps. So, I'm always fascinated to, hear and understand, how businesses are born, how the ideas came about, and so if you can just briefly highlight what inspired you to create let's go DevOps, and maybe what's the business is about, if you can just kind of highlight to our listeners.
So that's actually a funny story because what I need to tell you in the very beginning is that both founders, so me and Krzysztof, the second founder, we are engineers. So basically infrastructure engineers or DevOps engineers. And we never started this company as a purely business, related thing. The story starts, a few years before we even started the company, because during the pandemic, we worked in the same place, and the company that we were working for, they had most of the revenue coming from travel industry. So because during the COVID, there was no travel, there was no money in the system, so they had a little bit of financial issues, let's say. Yeah. But they decided that they don't want to fire everyone. It would be bad for the business itself. But they wanted to keep a look on how much they are spending, especially on the IT. So they came with the proposition that we will be working less hours and being paid a little bit less. So we decided that, okay, those are hard times, so let's take the deal. In the first 2 months, it was really great because we had those additional days during the week to actually do something. But during the pandemic, you couldn't actually go anywhere. So after like a month or so, we decided, okay, let's look for some new challenges, probably a new company, small companies, someone that we can help out, maybe startups, to start building their infrastructure. And let's use those additional days to do something cool. So the pandemic took a little bit longer. And after the pandemic, a lot of those companies came to us and said that they actually got funding and they are open to hiring us full-time. So I believe we get like 4 full-time propositions, both of us. And at first we decided, okay, let's pick one of those companies and let's go there and let's say to everyone else that, sorry guys, we cannot. But so much heart and energy was put into those projects that we couldn't pick the right one. And we decided to do this switch, so to pivot in our heads. And instead of picking one, we decided, okay, let's call all the guys that we enjoyed working with over the years. Let's try to build a team, and let's try to, as a team, got this for clients, for companies, and let's try to make it work for a couple of those projects. And this is how Let's Go DevOps was actually founded. So you can say that the train was on the station. It was about to leave, and we as an engineers decided, okay, what can go wrong when it comes, or how hard it can be to run a company. And we decided, okay, let's start building a company, let's build a team, and let's start with those first projects. So we actually were in the really good situation because we had 4 clients in the first day of actually having a business. So this is how it started. And the goal of the company is to actually not only build and maintain, but having this long-term relationship with all the clients that we have. We want to long-term build, maintain, troubleshoot, help you out with all the infrastructure, especially cloud infrastructure, to make sure that we are with you along the way when you scale up, where you build new things. So yeah, it's a holistic approach to infrastructure.
Yeah, and I guess as you just mentioned, I guess you guys started a company with I guess good problem to have, because normally you start a company and like what's now? Well, obviously you got 4 clients waiting to come in and obviously give you business. How you guys finding obviously cloud, obviously AI is the whole new sort of ball game, but cloud, is, if I think there's still loads of companies, especially I guess new companies start cloud native, and the legacy companies are all still migrating towards the cloud. Do you still find, because what I find, even especially talking with security, do you still find the conversations around people that you need to explain shared responsibility model? Because sometimes people, I've discussed with business owners where they thinking, oh, we're moving in the cloud, so therefore, Azure or AWS or GCP is going to take care of us. They're going to do everything for you. But there's a responsibility model that lies, whether it's infrastructure as a service platform or software as a service, where the responsibilities lies is it's a quite a big of a breakdown.
So from my perspective, I'm not sure if we ever had discussion about where the AWS or any cloud provider is for what he's responsible for. But I think in every company we are trying to build this understanding of who's responsible for what, because we have usually, I know the DevOps is a culture, but usually we have the infra guys, we have security guys, we have developers, and we need to make a environment where we can actually share ideas and be productive while not stepping on each other's toes. So I think for every company that we work in, the boundaries are a little bit shifted. But usually what we try to do, and this is part of the promise that we give, is it's not only about infrastructure, it's about this DevOps culture. So one of the companies that we are working on has probably around 100 engineers or so. And because of licensing for some tool, we were recently checking out how many people are committing to our repository, the infrastructure one. And we have nearly 70 people, so 70% of your staff actually actively committing to the infrastructure repository. This means that most of the company is actually building infra from themselves. And we as the infrastructure team are helping them with modules, with abstraction, and so on. So we try to build this DevOps culture. And for this part, it is really tricky to find the right, I don't say boundaries, but places where people want to be in the company. Because some developers want to create a Jira ticket for you and don't bother with infrastructure at all, while you have a different set of people on the same company that would like to do everything on their own, and they understand infrastructure, and sometimes they need a little bit of guidance, and that's all. So you have those both worlds in single companies even.
Yeah, I can understand. How do you guys find it? You touched here a bit on culture, and I'm always fascinated. Obviously, whenever I talk to businesses, it's culture is not something that you can change overnight. Culture, you need to, it goes from top down and bottom up. So obviously, I assume if you walk into an organization that's engineering cloud native, it's quite easily. But if you walk into an organization that may be moving from on-prem to the cloud, they will have a very different culture, and more moving towards agility and DevOps sort of practices. I assume it takes quite a bit of getting used to the people.
Yes, it is, and this is especially important when you have the board that is already set towards the cloud, and they had all the brochures that are telling them you'll be so agile, you'll be so fast, you'll have so little spending on the cloud, you can save so much, and so on. But after they migrate, they usually do a lift and shift approach. So they have exactly the same setup as they had on premise. And they realize that, okay, this is not a best strategy. We are overspending. We are spending more time on development. The infrastructure is extremely tricky and so on. So yes, you need to start from the very beginning. So first of all, you need to make sure your dev teams actually understand what cloud is. And it's a little bit like other stuff, but you need to know the differences. First of all, if you want to really use the cloud, the dynamic environment that you get, this is something that you should embrace for the very beginning. So we have a lot of setups where doing chaos engineering is part of production setup, because we try to save some money using instances that may go away at any second. You also should think about utilizing the big blocks that you have in the cloud. Instead of building your own storage, use something like S3 on the AWS and just store the files over there if it's possible. Now, if you do this mind shift in developers, they are looking into the cloud as an opportunity to focus on the business layer, not necessarily on building around the infrastructure tools. So this is probably the first step. Then you have to make sure that the infra team, the admin team, DevOps team, however you call them, actually understand the cloud and is bold enough to do some crucial decisions to actually integrate and be cloud native on infrastructure side as well. So yeah, there's a lot of learning and a lot of teaching, showing around, and so on that you need to do in order to make sure that the entire company is ready for the cloud adoption.
Do you find yourself, you just kind of touched a bit on teaching, and I guess for me, the big importance is, and I guess sometimes businesses don't really understand, like, if you need to have a good architect inside a business, because normally, whenever you employ technology, it's not just for the sake of employing technology. Normally, you have a great architect whose vision is to translate business requirements into infrastructure solutions. And as you say, when you move into the cloud, yes, it's easy to lift and shift, but as you say, lift and shift normally creates an overhead, creates a massive price when people realize, like, oh, this cloud is not that cheap. But how you can transform your whole infrastructure that can increase, and especially I think moving into cloud, especially I see people now moving towards, being more resilient, being able to provide better SLAs to their clients, actually being able to withstand higher loads, withstand, downtime, because as long as you automate some of the workloads, you can essentially, withstand anything. Because the goal is, and I'm a big fan, I've read recently a great book it's called about chaos engineering, where you start, injecting experiments into your infrastructure. And, you're not thinking about, oh, what's going to happen if something bad happens? But you can experiment saying, oh, what happens if, my database is not accessible? Well, let's inject an error and see what happens and see how we can build those processes so we can react. So do you find that sometimes, you need to also teach people how to essentially translate and adopt cloud better to reach better solutions?
Yeah, it goes from this way. My favorite approach is to, especially for the young companies, not tell them that you can do this stuff differently. So if you don't have this all knowledge from the old world that, buying server, it's running on your rack for a couple of years, it's usually not restarted over a couple of months or years, and you start showing people, okay, every day we will be throwing away your machine that you are running on. We need to make sure that everything is automated, application boots up correctly, and so on and so on. They are so used to those ideas that when they are doing technical design, it just clicks the cloud native way. The bigger problem is in the organizations that usually have a lot of stuff already accumulated, and they have architects that were building, having those, physical servers in mind, because often you have a lot of stuff that is clustered, that is shared within nodes, or you need to have a full connection or constant connection to pool of nodes. It's not so dynamic. So in there, it requires a lot of changes, often application code changes, and those can be extremely slow, unfortunately. So whenever you're thinking about cloud migration, if you have something, it's not a couple of weeks, probably it will be a couple of years before you're fully cloud native. But we can focus on the stuff that brings you most value and start utilizing this part in the very beginning. So you'll see the value from day one, but then you need to remember that you just brought a lot of technical baggage with you. And at some point, you will need to pay out the tech debt that you have from on-premise side.
What do you think, like, how do you guys, at Let's Go DevOps, how do you guys differentiate from, in this, cloud market is very competitive. So how do you guys try to stand out, to make sure that you are, listened to, and you also, can get more business?
So first of all, try to do stuff holistically. So it's not only about getting a ticket about create this infrastructure for me or something like this, but we try to give you a full service. So this means that we want you to close your eyes on infrastructure at all, focus on your business, and we will do entire planning of your infrastructure, design of it. We will capture the roadmap. We'll talk with your development teams to make sure that the infrastructure is built for your company. So somebody actually called us that we are in-source DevOps team. So this means that we want to be with you, work with your engineers, to go have a beer with your engineers, to be part of your organization, to understand your business, and to build all the infrastructure components around it. So I think this is the biggest difference between us and a lot of companies that are doing DevOps services, because we ran in the past with, we cross lines with some companies that were giving people for single projects. They were always looking on the documentation what needs to be done. And usually had some issues when it comes to agile companies, that if you change the priorities or change the requirements mid-flight, and this happens, let's be honest, those companies were not delivering. So we decided, okay, maybe you can work differently. maybe we can be the internal team, but just, hired from external company. I'm not sure if it makes sense, but
no, it does. So basically, what I'm reading is that you guys, instead of saying, doing one piece of work for, say, infrastructure move, you guys essentially working towards having a long-term engagement and actually elevating someone's infrastructure across a number of time by injecting expertise into internal teams.
exactly.
Brilliant. Now, I just wanted to touch. So we spoke. You touched a bit about, because obviously I think nowadays, whenever I speak to, especially I guess people who are trying to learn, understand cloud, whether it's cloud security engineering or just cloud engineering in general, people sometimes, they can do Azure certificates, they do AWS certificates. But the problem is, I always say to people, you have to understand that whenever you walk into an enterprise, nobody using GUI nowadays to build cloud. You need to learn either Terraform or some type of scripting language. And I think the problem is, we kind of touched about, there was an organization where they had 70 people contributing to their infrastructure. How would you guys manage it? Because for me, the big problem is obviously when you have such a big scope of people committing to the infrastructure, obviously the drift of your configuration can change very quickly. And how do you enforce boundaries on that drift? Because obviously you can very quickly wear or open specific port that says is outside security policy, and all of a sudden, you can cause yourself some great problems.
So first of all, we try to avoid drift, and avoid drifts means that from the very beginning, we don't give permissions to click anything in the UI. I know it's tempting, but what we start with is a view only or observer policy that allows you to do some stuff, sometimes a little bit more than just view only. But this is your day-to-day routine where you are not changing the stuff that's, well, important. You may restart your server or something like this, that's okay, but you are not doing changes that are making a drift from the configuration. So that is the first part. Then what we learn over the years is that if you are building any module of kind of abstraction for the company and you expose some feature, you will find people using this feature. So for example, when it comes to some weird ports to be open, if you allow this, people will start using those weird ports. But if you say, okay, let's limit the traffic just to SSL, we don't need pure HTTP, so let's use HTTPS all the time. Actually, nobody will come to you asking, I need this application to be HTTP only, right? It's like everything in the company is built that external traffic is encrypted. So we can allow it for maybe internal communication or something like this. That would be probably okay. But the module and your developer experience with the infrastructure tools should be that from the very beginning, you are adding those layers and you are building the stuff the right way. And the right way doesn't mean my way, but the company way. Yeah. But there are some rules that come in the company that you are just following, and the tools are not allowing you to move outside of the boundary without, pulling some strings or having some conversations about the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, because that's why I find, sometimes, especially I guess in a startup world where companies are so eager to run and build new stuff that normally it's sort of the governance of the stuff that's already built can fall by the wayside. And that's what I normally ask. The problem is, unless you enforce it in some way, it's problematic because even though you can block GUI, but somebody might say, oh, I'm just going to commit this virtual machine. And, for testing purposes, I'm going to open port 22 to the world. And then, before you know it, they say, oh, I'm going to revert it. But then all of a sudden work finished and they forgot it. And then, and that's the key point, for me is, do you have policies? Do you have rule in place where these kind of things are captured at the end of the day?
Yes, we have. Unfortunately, from scary stories, we had traffic going through dev machines on some of weird setups. You can find this stuff, and probably all the companies have it, no matter how good they are at security and at policies. With policies, there are two big problems. So first of all, the policy needs to come from up, not from down. So usually in the bottom, we try to create a policy set of rules, but at some point we need usually a C-level usually a CISO, that will just make his stamp on the policy, and from this time on, this is something that we can enforce. Prior to this, it's more like a good recommendations from your fellow engineers, but until you have this formal agreement, there is no policy whatsoever. And I think this is one of the cases that we need to understand, that no matter how you trust your engineers, at some point, if you want to have policy, the management needs to get a stamp on it. And the second thing is about executing the policy. And with executing the policy, I mean two things. So first of all, creating a really restrictive policy in the company that was startup and we're doing everything by hand without any processes. You will not just start with the policy. Nobody will be able to actually fulfill it. So you need to have a really good plan of adding the stuff into your policy and giving a reasonable deadlines for people to actually stop using the practices and start using something else. And finally, when you reach the level where you have a policy approved and everyone is more or less going with the policy, you need to have usually some kind of process of auditing it and making sure all the engineers are following the policy. And if they are not, either having a good compliance standards
Yep.
Or having good conversation with your engineers to make sure everyone is in the company boundary when it comes to security.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's it's very important. So obviously, as you say, the one thing which I'm a big proponent, and I've seen that in organizations done where you can build a policy, but if you build a policy, just security goes down there in a corner and builds a policy. Now, unless you know intimately how every engineer or how engineering team works, that policy might not be applicable. So the goal is, I guess, when you build a policy, make sure that you consult all of the parties that the policy might affect, and making sure that the policy A can be enforceable and B, works for everyone. So I think it's very important. But we touched a few things about security. So I guess I wanted to ask, how do you believe that infrastructure as a code can improve not only efficiency but security as well in sort of DevOps environments?
So when it comes to security in infrastructure as code, it goes like with CI/CD pipelines. Recently, we start shifting the security left, right? So we start from secure design. We have a lot of tools that are checking it out and so on. And the same goes with Terraform or any other code. You can use a tool called TerraSec that will actually find the stuff in your code, not necessarily when you deploy it to production, and show you where are the potential issues with the configuration that you created. Also, you have all the benefits of having a code, right? So you have a peer review, you have a testing environment. On test environment, you can do a lot of stuff. And because it's exactly the same code as the production, then you can find a lot of issues on your pre-production environments. And this was not necessarily possible whenever you were clicking, because usually you had this drift between production and staging.
Yep.
I remember my first job, I was in big corporation, and we had some issues with databases, and we asked for report about configuration on production and or on certification, and we had like 400 differences in the configuration.
Yep.
So this means that the environments were not comparable to each other whatsoever. So with infrastructure as code, you make sure that the core elements of your infrastructure are the same on pre-prod and production. And you can do a lot of stuff during your QA to make sure that you are pushing a secure infrastructure upwards.
Yeah. And I think especially now with probably the way infrastructure as code is becoming so, I guess, relevant and so important across organizations, I think another great aspect is that obviously, as long as you have, you enable, whether it's versioning, whether it's some level of control of your code, I've seen firsthand, like whether you do disaster recovery exercises and things like that, you can rebuild stuff very quickly because obviously, just push commit code and it's done. Whereas, if you remember when you try and install, Windows XP on a machine or something, or build a new server in sort of a legacy setup, it'll probably take forever. So I guess that's really helps, in sort of building resiliency, building sort of that disaster recovery testing, and actually rebuilding stuff when stuff goes wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's whenever I'm talking about infrastructure and code, and trust me, especially for the young people, I have this we have those conversations about why do we need it. It's so easy to just click on AWS and use it. But it's a little bit like having your company that has a lot of tech and saying, I don't need the source code. The binaries are okay. I will just run them. I will patch them, or I will do some weird stuff with it to make sure the new requirements are added into those. When it comes to infrastructure, it's exactly the same. You are not telling somebody that you want just infrastructure to be built in the AWS and having this outcome of it. So having the source code for it, making sure that you can copy it, reuse it. So like moving from one country to another, or becoming a global company that can deploy anywhere, this became extremely easy because you are just moving pieces of the code, or maybe just overriding some stuff in your configuration, and you are deploying to multiple regions, and you can do it within a couple of hours probably if you have everything well designed.
Yeah, exactly. You just copy paste, replace region, UK South to East US, and that's it, and it's done, isn't it? So easy. I guess I wanted to touch a bit as well. So we touched a bit about various, I guess migrations into cloud. Do you guys still see, I think there was a last few years, there was a big shift move towards serverless applications. Do you guys still see the serverless being as a future or not? Because I see like there is shift, like people are moving obviously away from infrastructure as a service. So there's a lot of organizations using obviously Kubernetes, microservices architecture, but there was a big push on obviously in terms of cost saving, moving towards serverless. Do you think that's still the future, or where do you see this happening now currently with your clients?
I'm not sure if I ever saw the serverless as a true future. We had this episode in our lives. I think everyone had, where he looked at serverless and thought, this is the future. We built some Lambdas on AWS when they happened. We used few appliances that come as a server or serverless. So you can use a Redshift serverless option. You can use Aurora in AWS. That's also serverless option. And we never it never fulfilled our expectations. So when it comes to Lambda and using it as your driver for a business logic, it's usually extremely hard to maintain. So it's really okay for really small applications and so on and so on. But as the code base grows bigger and bigger, it's a lot easier to use those techniques that we have for 50 years for deploying your stuff to code to servers. Even if you're using Docker, it's a little bit similar. So it's incremental change. With serverless, it's completely different approach, usually really hard to maintain. People are scared to do maintenance of Lambdas at some point. We have companies that are willing to freeze their development for a couple of days because they are releasing stuff on Lambdas. It's not that easy as it should be. I see how it can be beneficial for you when you are a single-handed developer that is trying to build some software and you just use a tool and push it to AWS and it magically works. And this is great, but we had one of our friends that actually was building application this way. And at some point he asked us that he has some weird traffic in his AWS account. And we learned that the tool that he was using was opening everything up because you want the stuff to work, not necessarily be secure. So everything was open. Even some IAM keys were embedded into the mobile application or pushed into the front end of the application. And if you were good enough with, just decomposing the Android package to find the IAM keys, you could actually get those IAM keys that allowed you a little bit more than you were expecting them to. Also, it's a bad practice to just push it to the application. So but this is how those tools usually work. So they give you a really quick boost in how fast you can go to production, but usually it's the cost of security and the cost that you will be paying if you are successful for all the serverless infrastructure, let's say servers for the serverless option. Those are extremely expensive. So the more requests you have, the more you'll be paying for the infrastructure. And at some point, this cost is like 10 or even 100 times more than you'd be paying for a classical setup with a working application deployed on, for example, Kubernetes or anything, actually.
we talked a bit, and you mentioned a bit there, obviously helping your clients to save on costs and things like that. How do you guys are approaching the cost saving sort of conversations with your clients? Are you talking about, because obviously there is a few routes you take, you can obviously start talking, there is savings plans, there is reserved instances, and obviously there's whole, optimization and re-platformization, and probably changing infrastructure to make sure that it obviously costs less, or chasing SKUs, upscaling, downscaling. Obviously, I talk with some people, why are you running these servers 24/7 if they're only, serving traffic, say 8 hours a day? Then run them, say 9 to 5 every day. Or if you got a development team, run them 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. You can create, plans for these machines, when they should run and when they shouldn't. So how do you guys normally approach that sort of cost conversations?
I'm not sure if there's a normally.
Yeah, okay.
Like every time we come to the company, it's start with a billing dashboard to actually get a grip of what company is doing. And you mentioned a lot of techniques that you can use. And we are usually starting from the low-hanging fruits. Like if you have databases, you don't have savings plan for those. You usually don't up and down scale your database. So it's usually a really easy task to do a savings plan for your databases.
No.
It may be a little bit more tricky for compute, but we are starting the discussion about what can we do with compute, and especially if companies are using Kubernetes or have some kind of driver for adding and removing servers. We are opting for spot instances because they can save you 50%, sometimes even 70% of compute. But this means that your applications need to be prepared for being shut down in 120 seconds, right? So it's not that easy decision. So we need to find a balance. How many instances can be actually using the spot instances or ephemeral VMs, while the rest should be actually pre-bought and have some kind of saving plan. So we try to find this balance and make sure the company is, okay with the approach that we are taking. For other stuff, it goes similar. So we look on the streets. This is a really good place for starting your cuts when it comes to costs, especially that in the prior days when you were running out of disk space, you were removing all the stuff, or figuring out how to get rid of data. With S3, it's only I can add a lot of data, and I will never get the information that I run out of storage. So people are accumulating data over there. And this is a talk not only with engineers, but usually with business about what can we do with the data that you have. Do you really need to have those terabytes of old files that you are never accessing? So we are enabling access logs. We are trying to monitor the stuff that's going on and try to advise what can we do with particular sections of the cloud. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of techniques. We try to find the region of the cloud that is most overspent, or we think we can have some savings over there. It can be network, it can be storage, it can be compute, and we try to deep dive into this particular section to find potential for improvements.
Yeah, as you say, I think it's very important sometimes, just to probably thinking about from customer's perspective, it's essentially probably risk versus reward, where I can be more aggressive, where the workloads are probably not production based, and it's not my crown jewels that are delivering me money. We could probably be more aggressive in savings, whereas, the production workloads maybe do reservations. And I think especially sometimes it's, I sometimes talk to people, sometimes, I guess even engineers themselves are probably not aware of, but I often talk, you'd mentioned about data, often talk about creating essentially automation workloads. So say, for example, maybe this data, you only need, say, immediate access for 30 days. Now let's create rule that this data sits for 30 days in a hot sort of access tier, but then after 30 days, it moves into sort of, maybe sort of medium, or not necessarily cold, but sort of medium storage. And then after another 90 days, you can put in a cold storage and keep it for as long as you need it legally before you delete it. But this segmentation can save you a lot of money on that, on data storage as well.
Yeah, and there are actually a new tool, so something that's coming into the clouds where they try to use, I'm not sure if it's AI or more like machine learning, to make those decisions for you. So I believe AWS started a intelligent storage that can do those tier migrations for you. So yeah, a lot can be achieved really easily if you know that there is this flag or this option that you can just enable. And yeah, but this means that you need to be prepared for that. Data will be on the lower tier and you will need to wait for it a little bit longer.
Yeah. But as you say, it's it's talking with business people and providing, I guess, suggestion or ideas, and at the end of the day, they will make the decision because obviously these are the people that paying money for it. I'm always fascinated, and you kind of alluded a few times on Kubernetes, and I wanted to touch, how you guys approaching, Kubernetes deployments for your customers, especially Kubernetes security, because I've seen many Kubernetes deployments and actually worked with many, and I always still fascinated that how many, I guess, layers and how much understanding you need to know in order to secure Kubernetes end to end, because we're talking about enforcing security context, stuff like making sure that containers are not running as root. Containers can't escalate their privileges. We're talking about MTLS, container to container encryption. Some of these things that usually sometimes people completely forget. And I was like, I talked to somebody and they said, "Oh yeah, our containers are, Kubernetes are encrypted." I said, "Yeah, it's encrypted up to application gateway." I said, "You don't have encryption from container to container. So if one container is compromised, because by default, every single container can talk to every single container. So one container compromised means your whole Kubernetes is compromised."
Yeah, so again, there are a lot of options to do it. So first of all, what we try to do is we try to use Kubernetes as a service, so it decreases the burden on our side when it comes to properly setting it up and so on. It's a lot of hassle, especially if you are thinking about upgrades of Kubernetes. Making sure that everything is up to date and ready for doing update is a little bit tricky. So first of all, we go to those managed options, and then it a lot depends about entire setup of the company. So if for me it's a new company, completely vanilla and so on, we are starting with adding a lot of tools that are preventing from doing certain stuff. So for example, because we like to do a load balancing based on the AWS network, not the internal Kubernetes network, we can also add security groups for pods that are deployed there. So we can use the same mechanisms that were previously available. So firewall done by security groups, and we can control the traffic between pods because this is in the virtual AWS network, not necessarily a Kubernetes one. So then we go a lot with tools like Kyverno that are prohibiting you for doing certain stuff like running your containers as root. The next step, or probably the previous step actually, is to embed stuff in your CI/CD pipeline. So if you are building Docker images, we can use tools like Trivy, for example, that will find a lot of potential issues, not only with the libraries that you have, but also with Docker configuration. So if you allow Docker to run as root, you will be caught on the CI/CD pipeline, and the pipeline will tell you that, hey, you are doing weird stuff with your Docker file, so fix it, because it will not go to production whatsoever. And having the same set of rules on production and staging actually makes the deployment process at least predictable, because if you were not able to deploy to staging, you'll definitely not be able to deploy to production. So we try to utilize as many tools to give developers feedback on their journey and make sure that we are secure on the Kubernetes itself part. And the things are just not allowed over there. So that's the usual approach.
And I guess just to elevate on that, how do you guys address, because I think one of the problems that I'm always wrangling with, obviously the bigger the cluster, the more, the bigger the application, obviously, the more containers are running. So when you get to a point where, you start vulnerability management on containers, some of the, dependencies can become out of date very quickly. And then, if you need to update like 200-300 of containers because there's specific vulnerability, can be difficult. So do you guys run specific like standard, I guess container images or something like that that's always up to date? How do you guys manage vulnerabilities in Kubernetes clusters?
Well, so in many companies, it's more of a CISO role to give a policy. So, I won't give you a direct answer over here. But the thing that we are trying to implement, or the thing that we are opting for, is like in one company, we had this idea that your container should be rebuilt once every while. So a week, 2 weeks, a month or so. And during this rebuild, even if you don't have a code changes, you are pulling new packages and so on and so on. So we were utilizing the CI/CD tools and CI/CD pipelines to make sure that we are rebuilding applications often, right? So this gave us, first of all, we were sure that we can always deploy to production because, well, we were doing it every 2 weeks or every month. So you knew that all the libraries are there, that your tests are okay, and so on and so on. And whenever we had any critical vulnerability in the library, we could just enforce the process of pushing the stuff to production. So that is one of the techniques that we are trying to use. And this particular setup had all the developers, the owners of application, aware about the application that's older than a policy. So it was actually an alert in the system that was sending you notifications that your application is too old. For some reason, it was not rebuilt, not deployed. So you should take a look that something is not okay with the CI/CD pipeline that we are having for the company.
Okay.
So yeah, because it's as you said, a little bit of a challenge if you start having over 100 microservices and a lot of containers deployed. Managing all the dependencies is hard.
Yeah, and that's what you say. As long as you build in cadence and do that on a regular cycle, it becomes much less burdensome because you are used to it and you do it all the time. I guess, we coming, I guess, nearing to the end. I wanted always, obviously, as you mentioned, business is been relatively new, but you obviously started with 4 clients, and obviously it's growing, and you helping customers not only save money but build reliable and great infrastructure. So if you can share any of without necessarily sharing names, but any success stories how a client transformed their infrastructure and achieved, I guess, better business outcomes through working with you guys.
So I guess one of the clients we are there from the very beginning when the company was pretty young. And this is the company where we were able to show the cloud native approach. And recently we have this event when we try to estimate how much they would pay for infrastructure if it would not be a cloud native one. So we came to the conclusion that it will be 5 times the money that they are paying for that currently. So it's like you can be in 20% range of what you're currently paying if you go cloud native. And to be honest, when looking on different companies that we help out in different stages, I would say that the 5x is only a theoretical value, because usually it's somewhere between 8 and 10x, because you have this urge in the cloud that if something is not performing the way you want, you just click it and say, I want a bigger machine, I want a bigger server, and so on. So the costs are pretty much usually going out of boundary. And that's a big problem for most of the cloud setups. If you don't have it well contained in the very beginning, and if you don't have this cloud native approach for the very beginning, you will be dramatically overspending. And yeah, what we did for this customer is keeping the platform, because this is how we can call it now, contained in a certain way that they are really paying pennies for how much power they have in their platform.
Okay, brilliant. And I guess to end, if customers, if somebody seen the episode, they heard something interesting, how people could find out more about the business, how can they engage, if they are thinking about either moving to the cloud or thinking about, oh, maybe, my clouds are, costs are spinning out of control, how I can find someone who could help me.
So probably they can go to our LinkedIn. That would be the easiest option, or find me on LinkedIn and contact me via LinkedIn. It would be a easiest option. We also have a web page, but it looks a little bit oldish. We are a infrastructure guys, not web developers. So of course, Let's Go DevOps PL or Let's Go DevOps IO will give you information about what we do, and also a contact information, how you can reach us. And if you have a challenge, we are really open for challenge. I have a lot of Navy SEALs on my team, so we are looking for something that is fun to play with.
Brilliant. Okay. And that was episode number 15. So first of all, thank you very much, Jacek, for coming along. That was Jacek and Let's Go DevOps.
Okay, thank you very much.